Shalom Chaverim. Welcome to this episode of On the Road to Zion. Today we have met a fellow traveler. Her name is Corinne Hindes, and she is a content creator who is Jewish, but not a Jewish content creator. And so the distinction is that unlike the last guests that I've had who really make their content about Judaism, about Zionism, it's the central part of their content. Corinne is a model. There's a lot of the content that she does. I'll let her describe it specifically, but the aesthetic that she has, somehow she makes brown beautiful. And I was incredibly impressed by it. But ironically, the way that I found her was through her now fiance, who just kept popping up on my reels. I would never dress like him, mostly because I could never pull off what he is able to pull off. His content is incredibly engaging. The voice that he has with his microphone and the slap of his shoehorn is just incredible. And that led to me somehow finding Corinne. And eventually, when I saw that she was posting about anti-Semitism, I started to follow her because I was curious. And now she talks more and more about it. She posts a lot about anti-Semitism specifically, and she loves to post about the people who are anti-Semitic on her comments, despite the fact that she's not a Jewish content creator. And so I thought it would be so important to bring her on to talk about her experience, given the fact that she doesn't make this a central part of her online presence. So I will let her now introduce herself. So Corinne, why don't you tell us who you are and what your story is?
Yeah, so I kind of fell into content creation on Instagram. We're kind of in the earlier days, like 2016, 2017. I was always into taking just like artsy photos, as I used to call them, with my friends, going out with our little old iPhones and trying to snap some photos out in the woods and different things. But I got invited way back when I was 17 years old to like an Instagram meetup with a bunch of photographers by a friend who was going, and they put out a call that they needed models. And he's like, hey, you're pretty good in front of a camera. Like, you should come. And that just kind of launched my career on Instagram, where I suddenly had all these connections to photographers. And I was going out and shooting like every other week, taking all these photos. And that just kind of became something that I fell in love with, was being both in front of and behind the camera, as well as the editing process of photos afterwards, which is why I have such a distinctive brown aesthetic.
It works well. I was like, what is happening here?
I've been very consistent with it across the years. My whole life is that, actually, now. My whole wardrobe, my home decor. I live in 50 shades of brown. I love it.
And in terms of your your Jewish story as well, like where is that kind of, because your Jewish story is not on Instagram, is not on the internet the way that so many other Jewish content creators are. What can you tell us a little bit more as well about your Jewish story and where you grew up and where you are today in that?
So my Jewish story is a little unique. I grew up knowing that I was Jewish and very proud of that Jewish identity, and told to be very proud of that Jewish identity. But I didn't really know how to be Jewish, or like how to really connect with our community. My family fled and survived the pogroms in Russia, and then we survived the Holocaust in Poland. And so when we came to the US, my grandmother raised her three daughters essentially to be very proud of their identities, but she also raised them to kind of hide them, out of fear of what had happened and what could happen. And I'm assuming what she anticipated is happening right now, with anti-Semitism being so widespread again. And so my mother didn't really know how to raise me in our cultural traditions or with any connection to our community, but she did raise me to be a proud Jew. And so when I was around 15, 16, I started to kind of connect more with that Jewish identity. And it was actually my nonprofit work that like fully reconnected me to the Jewish community, which allowed me to kind of fully embrace who I was as a Jew and find my own identity in our culture and traditions, and kind of learn the complexities of our histories and all of our practices, which is really cool.
Wow. And so can you tell us a little bit more then about the nonprofit work, because, I'm in Jewish nonprofits, but from my understanding, the nonprofit that you were running or was not Jewish, like as in, it's focused on Jewish issues, but maybe it might be inspired by, Jewish values. So how did you come up with this, or what is it? How did you come up with it? And also, what is the connection to the Jewish community?
Yeah, so I founded Warm Winters when I was 11 years old. I pretty much saw issues with homelessness all around me growing up in the Bay Area, and I always kind of felt a drive to do something about it, but I didn't really, as a child, know what to do about it. I also grew up as a ski racer in California, so I was up in the mountains skiing every single weekend, and of course, as a child, would lose the occasional hat, glove, and whatnot. So I always ended up in the lost and found. And around that same age, when I kind of felt that drive to do something, especially because I would see the same homeless man when I would drive home every single day.
Mm.
And I wanted to find a way to help him, but I didn't really know how. And so I made that connection of this overflowing lost and found that I would see all the time. And this man who clearly was in desperate need of a warm coat and clothes to keep him warm in the winter, and decided to start donating the items that were left in ski resort lost and founds to local homeless shelters. And so that idea spread. I brought in a friend that was also a skier with me in childhood, and we started doing that together. And then that project grew to ski resorts all across the US, Canada. And eventually we started doing after school curriculum programs where we were able to go around to different schools, middle schools and high schools across the US, and teach other youth how to give back to their communities, do clothing drives, toiletry drives, and essentially help homeless populations in ways that they felt compelled to as well.
Wow. And
But to connect that,
so then how did that get you connected to your Jewish community?
yeah. So I obviously in high school was looking for scholarships, awards, whatnot, not only to fund our program, but also to help fund my future college career as that was approaching as I was getting older. And so one of the awards that I applied for and won was the Diller Teen Tikkun Alum Awards, which is a Jewish-based award. And I knew I was Jewish, and you have to be Jewish to apply for it. So
Mm.
that's why I did. And I felt like I was upholding the value of Tikkun Olam in the work that I was doing. But again, at that age, like I had very little connection to an actual like Jewish community. And so that was kind of my introduction to that, of like really being connected to like our culture and
Hmm.
our people. And so they do a whole like award ceremony weekend, which is wonderful and amazing. And that whole weekend, like we did Shabbat together, like it was just incredible. It was something that like I knew existed, but had never really felt that kind of like light and joy and sense of community with other Jews before. And that just completely sparked the fire of my Jewish identity, which made me go back and start learning like everything that I could about our traditions and our culture and our history. And then a couple years later, like I said, like 2017, 2018, I started modeling. And actually, one of my first paid modeling gigs was for a small jewelry brand based in San Francisco. And she offered to fly me down from Portland because I just moved to Portland at that time and do a shoot. And we were talking, and at the time I was like, "Oh, your page is Jewish. I'm Jewish." And she was like, "I had no idea you were Jewish. Like, this is perfect." And the jewelry maker was actually Debbie. It was Roots Metals back when
Oh my
she was a
God. Oh,
jewelry brand.
that's
Yeah.
so
So
cool.
we became fast friends, and her work through teaching everyone about Jewish history and nuance absolutely helped kind of that education that I was lacking and needed to connect with our community, and also just gave me another resource of another Jew that I could learn from and connect to and feel that sense of community with. And so that kind of sparked the joining of my Jewish identity and my social media. And then, of course, I think that was amplified quite a bit by October 7th.
Yeah. So do you currently still work and live in Portland?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. And so when you were living in Portland, let's say even before October 7th, were you involved in the Jewish community? Were you connected to, I don't really know actually that much about it. I know that there's a small Jewish community up there, or maybe it's larger than I think. Were
Yeah.
you connected in any way, especially as a young adult?
Yeah, so I connected a little bit to the Jewish community here when I moved up here when I was around 18.
Hmm.
But it wasn't as much. I think I've connected a lot more post October 7th. Like I didn't really attend shul or anything
Yeah.
that often. But my roommate up here when I was a new adult in college was also Jewish. So we were able
Okay.
to practice our holidays together and do Shabbat together. And that was absolutely incredible. Like some of my favorite years of my life,
That's amazing.
honestly. But after October 7th, she had moved to San Francisco at that point to go to
Mm,
med school. And so I felt that kind of lacking
mm,
of a Jewish community here. So that was when I started like attending shul and really trying to find that Jewish community in Portland, which it is a small community here. It's a
yeah.
very small community. And it was interesting for me to kind of have to navigate that because I think that Portland is a very progressive city.
Yeah.
And
Also very white, which is
yes.
ironic.
And I have always kind of found myself at home in those progressive spaces, especially as like a queer person, as a Jewish person. I think most Jewish people have always kind of teetered that way, at least the ones
A
that
lot
I've
have,
been
yeah.
around. Yeah. Um, but that was new, was to not be really welcome in those spaces. And I think a lot of the Jewish community here in Portland kind of split, where some of them stayed in that progressive area and in some ways kind of let go of vital aspects of their Jewish identities to stay in
Mm.
those progressive circles. And I kind of struggled to navigate through that and to find the Jewish community that was still so solidified in like our history and our culture and our community, and to have that kind of unity despite all of the anti-Semitism that we were facing.
Yeah, I really want to dig in on that because
Mm.
one of the things that people who are maybe consider themselves, more traditional, or really, hardcore Zionist people, maybe who would be quote unquote right wing, when they look at somebody like you, or they think about somebody like you with your background,
Mm.
they would very easily assume that you would be a person that would just shed what is, what they would consider maybe to be a shallow Jewish identity in order to stay in your progressive spaces, especially because I would assume that a lot of those progressive spaces are where your friends were and where
Yeah.
your community was. And so you had to make this choice between, essentially keeping your friends and, keeping the life that you had, or keeping your identity, which, for all intents and purposes was, a work, a work in progress, or at the beginning aspects of your journey. What
Yeah.
was something that you found, like, what was the thing that kind of kept you tethered more to the Jewish identity and less to the other parts of your life that maybe were more comfortable, that were stronger? What was it that said, no, 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 I'm actually going to leave this shelter, I'm going to leave this shore, and I'm going to keep going on my journey?
I think it was that demand from like non-Jewish circles to kind of reject my Jewish identity that made me kind of like dig my heels in a little deeper and say, absolutely not. Go F yourself. But no, I did grow up in those spaces. That was the majority of my social circle, my friends, my family was those kind of progressive spaces, especially like I think the queer space, the LGBTQ space. And to lose that on October 7th was really hard, but I think having that, like, stark difference from, like, October 6th in my
Yeah.
friendships to October 7th and 8th
Yeah.
was what made me realize, like, I will not give up who I am. And again, like, I was raised to be a proud Jew. I didn't really know how to be that, but I
Mm.
was still raised to be proud of it, and that was cemented in me
What did
by.
that look like, actually? If I could, real quick,
Yeah.
when you say that you were raised to be a proud Jew, even though you didn't know how to be, what did that look like? That's just so fascinating, because so much of Jewish pride is tied into
Our
with
traditions and our
with,
culture.
yeah, with doing Passover or doing all of these other things. So I'm so curious, what did that look like for you?
So I think a big part of that was like my grandmother raised my mom to not really like they didn't really practice their traditions at home, but my grandmother did, but she did not really share that with her children.
Hmm.
And so they kind of lost the connection to our practices. And like I knew of them, like my mom educated me as best as she could, but I think the biggest focus was always just saying like, "Oh, but we're Jewish." And like that's amazing. And talking a lot about our
Hmm.
family history versus like our community's history. So I knew a lot about like our family, or as much as I could, that
Yeah.
we didn't lose, but fleeing the pogroms and then fleeing Poland and like that history. And that was where we kind of centered our pride, I think, when we lost that connection.
Hmm.
And that was what fueled me to want to really reconnect to our community, because I'm like, we're not alone in this. Like
Yeah.
everyone in our community has gone through some form of this. And that's
Hmm.
what strengthens us and brings us together. And so I think I really wanted to kind of reforge that connection for my family, especially because I'm the youngest and I'm kind of the
Mm,
last of our line. Like I'm the only
mm.
grandchild.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and so to really kind of bring that back and fully bring back our traditions, especially thinking about like when I have kids,
Yeah.
wanting to instill that pride in every way that I can and fully envelope that in our lives.
That's amazing. So what do you think what do you think is the difference? Because, you said that, like, you dug your heels in and you're like,
Yeah.
no, like I'm not gonna, give up my identity. What do you think the difference was between you and maybe a friend of yours who was also Jewish but decided to reject, like they decided to give in. They said, you know what, I reject my Judaism or I reject my Jewish identity in order to stay in these progressive spaces. Is it really just come down to personality and that, like, the more stubborn Jews are the ones that remain Jewish versus, or is it something else?
I I feel like I think about this a lot. Like, obviously, October 7th happened, and most of my friends ended up turning around on October 8th or October 9th. I mean, literally, my best friend who I grew up with, and we were super close. I think as adults, our friendship kind of weaved and waned a little bit, but like, I thought she would be my best friend forever. And I'm not even joking when I say that on October 8th and 9th, she turned around before Israel even responded while we were still figuring out the aftermath. While October 7th was still
Yeah,
happening
like Hamas
in some
was
areas
still
of
in there.
Israel. Yeah.
Yeah.
She, in response to my stories, like trying to find the words to communicate my devastation and talk about what was happening, decided to respond by spamming my DMs with messages and videos essentially demonizing Israel again before they even responded.
Wow.
Not to say that like there are certain actions that I agree with everything, but demonizing the Jewish state before there was anything to even talk about, demonizing all Jews, essentially telling me that like I can't be Jewish right now. And that I need to reject, like I shouldn't be proud of this and I shouldn't be like fighting for my community right now. And that I saw that pattern, obviously it was, I think, the most devastating from her. But there were people I grew up playing music with that, were with me all through middle school and high school that suddenly turned around and were calling me a dirty Jew in my DMs and a genocide supporter and a baby killer and like all the blood libels and the conspiracy theories and everything that like my grandmother taught me about, and that I
Wow.
heard about throughout our history. And I think that was what for me, like, especially being taught about our personal history and kind of seeing the stories that my grandmother told of anti-Semitism, which were honestly very limited,
Yeah.
um, from what she would like be willing to share with us. But seeing that pattern repeat and also the education that I sought for myself, I think was huge. Like the fact that I didn't just grow up being told, minimal things about our history and stuff, but that I actually had to go out and seek it and learn it
Hmm.
all for myself.
Hmm.
I think that kind of really was what solidified that pride and that identity in me as a Jew versus I think a lot of like Bay Area Jews, a lot of the West Coast Jews in general, we see it in Portland, they didn't have as deep of a connection, not only to like themselves as a Jew, but to the broader community at large, to our
Hmm.
history in the land of Israel. And they were so easy to kind of cut ties with that in
Yeah.
hopes to be accepted by the non-Jewish community, which I
Yeah.
just think is sad. Like we have survived so much. We are such a strong community, especially when we come together, and to just be so willing to throw that away in hopes that people don't hate you for your identity that you can't even change. Um, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I am heartbroken
Yeah.
for you. Like, I don't think that I experienced that so much myself because I was just so heavily involved in Jewish spaces growing up in BBYO and just all over the place.
Mhm.
And so I don't think that I had like super strong ties with anybody in particular that was just so radically against me on October 7th. But I know that my wife did. I obviously, I have other friends that did. This is such a common occurrence, and it really breaks my heart because it it's so strange how they call, like, in internet terms, brain rot, anti-Semitism is brain rot or Jew hatred is brain rot. And but in some ways it kind of
I
is because
I mean,
if
it is, but
you
it isn't. It's
right, but
everywhere.
right, it's like if you are somebody who can literally erase, just click delete on a friendship, on a lifelong relationship in which you have shared the most intimate parts of yourself, and you can just literally delete that because of these blood libels that have been seeping in, then that it almost feels like it is. And so I'm just, again, those types of spaces, for me, it was a lot more existential, that like I had, fought, I, worked in democratic politics. I had, done all the work that I had been told to do as a quote unquote white man, to, unlearn all of my biases and to, be an ally. And I was an ally. And so for me, it was less like personal, but it was more like kind of like identity based, of like, well, what have I been fighting for the last 10 years? And I feel so heartbroken for people who had to have which is to me a far more personal issue with that. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that's something like that's why I post about it, is the
That's what
first
my
week
next
of
question was going to ask
messages.
you.
Yeah, the first week of messages following October 7th weren't from strangers or bots online. They were from my friends.
Yeah.
And they were exactly the same as all, and I still get them. Like some of those people still message me. Like every couple months, they'll still respond to my stories and spam me with like horribly
Yeah.
horrific anti-Semitic
Well,
messages.
they're convinced that, well, like, if I just send her one more
Learn,
message, you're a dirty Jew, she is definitely going to see my point of view.
Like if I
Uh,
call her a baby killer one more time,
oh,
she'll
just
get it.
one more accusation of genocide.
But like
Um,
again, they're exactly the same, and that's why I started sharing them, because I think that people see, these mass, especially under any Jewish creators posts, if they just
yeah,
mention that they're Jewish anywhere,
right.
their comments are filled with these horrific anti-Semitic messages, and they think that
Yeah.
it's just all bots. People like, oh, like I get responses to my stories all the time, like, oh, like don't listen to them, it's just spam, like that's not real people, and I'm like,
No, they're,
no, it is, because I saw the same messages from people that I know.
yeah,
Like it is the same people. And
yeah,
that's why I share it, is to try and spread that awareness of like, hey guys, like this is not normal, especially as someone who is still kind of connected to a lot of the non-Jewish community and whose majority following is not Jewish, like to kind
mm,
of spread that awareness of like, hey guys, this is reality right now. Like I know
yeah,
you don't see it in your spaces, and you're probably seeing something that's very
the
opposite to
opposite.
it in your spaces, yeah, that opposes this. But like as a Jewish person, this is what we're all dealing with at this moment in time.
So was there like a time where, because I feel like I was following you, where you had like one of your pinned posts was a Jewish star, and then I saw like a second pinned post that was like a Jewish star, and then I saw three were pinned Jewish stars, and it seemed like more of your content was, you started sharing more of other content creators, like of Jewish content, roots metals, and all these things. Was there a kind of a natural progression into that, or was there kind of maybe a singular moment where you're like, no, like I need to use my voice in order to make sure that people know what our reality is right now?
So after I met Debbie, that was kind of when I started, and again, this was very early in my Instagram career, but that was when I started sharing
Yeah.
more about just like Jewish history posts that she would make, or even from other Jewish creators. I started sharing those intermittently on my story, and that was consistent throughout, like
Mm,
since 2018, 2019. I had been doing that on my story, but I had never made a post of my own about my
mm,
Jewish identity, just because it wasn't super relevant. Like I only really posted
yeah.
my modeling and photography, and that's kind of where Instagram stayed. Like
Yeah.
even my nonprofit work, I don't really post about on there. But I think after October 7th was when I was like, I'm done hiding this part of myself. Like
Mm,
I have a platform, I'm gonna use it. Like I'm gonna talk about what's going on. And even then, I don't cover everything. Like I'm not
yeah.
a news source, and I don't think I should be, but I talk about what's relevant with anti-Semitism, and I share educational information that other people write that I, fully read and know that I fully agree with. Um,
Mm,
and I'm pretty conscious about that too, about what I share, because I don't want my page to transition to something that doesn't feel authentic or feels performative, because I don't think that
yeah.
that's helpful either. Um, but that's kind of how I focused in on the anti-Semitism. It's like, well, this is stuff that I'm seeing myself and that I can share on my
Mm,
own. Um, and then I just started making posts about it. So I think my first post ever was like after October 8th, just kind of trying to put my feelings out there. And it was meant to be a temporary post. Like it was just words that I threw out on a story, and a couple people were like, make this a post, I want to share it. So I did, and I was
mm,
only going to keep it up for like a week. And then the war just kept progressing and
yeah.
progressing. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to leave it. Um, and then I think anti-Semitism hit like a really bad peak a few months after the war for me personally, where like I was getting it constantly every day. And that was back when like it was really high influx from people I knew in real life too. Whereas that's kind of dwindled down now as I've blocked people and moved on.
And they've realized, they're like, God, I called her a baby killer 8 times. And there's no way that the 9th time is going to change her. So I guess
if I call her a Nazi again, she'll get it this time. But that's when I made a post with my first like Jewish Star post, which was like like I love being a Jew more than you will ever hate me for it, and just essentially was like proud Jew today, proud Jew tomorrow. And I'm sure that was inspired by what other people were posting at the same time too, that was kind of in the same vein. But that did really well. And I realized that people, especially like my Jewish followers, which I was getting more and more of, were really appreciating the fact that I was trying to, speak for our community as much as I could without wanting to do so in a way, again, that felt performative. And so I was trying to find authentic ways to kind of incorporate that with my content in ways that felt natural for me and that I felt pulled to do. And so intermittently, I have a few posts now here and there. Like I made one on the October 7th anniversary, just kind of expressing my feelings about the state of the world, and also like talking about anti-Semitism in academia and schools, especially watching what was happening around campuses with all the encampments going on last year, especially. And then I made one more recently, kind of accumulating some of the comments that I've gotten and messages I've gotten over the last year and a half. Just kind of shove that into like an actual post versus stories for people to really get kind of that little look into what it's like right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So if I could maybe transition a little bit, because you just got engaged.
Yeah, I did.
Which is awesome. Mazel tov. As I mentioned in the introduction, I, funny enough, found you through your fiance, who is not Jewish, correct?
He is not Jewish, yes.
And so what I'm curious about, because there's right now a major, again, conversation in a lot of, Jewish spaces about, patrilineal Jews. I'm the one that's usually bringing that to the forefront, about interfaith marriages, because everyone is trying to figure out, well, how do we, like, why are so many Jews, right? These as a Jews, like, tokenizing themselves or quote unquote betraying us, where do these people come from? And, there's certainly not a causation, but there is a correlation between those who are, more reform or less observant in their relationship with Israel, those who maybe come from interfaith families, or those who are patrilineal, whatever it is, right? And I have my own thoughts on that, and like I think some of the misnomers that they have about those types of things. But nonetheless, for you, right? I don't know when you started dating, but like, what has it been like for you? Because if you have this incredible Jewish pride, right? You clearly feel like it's important to be a part of our, to be a member of our tribe, to be a member of our community. And so a lot of people would be curious, well, if your Jewish values are so important to you, why don't you make sure that you marry a Jewish person? For you, how has it been like with your fiance, and what has it been like to have these types of conversations to make sure that no matter what, your kids have the same type of Jewish pride that you grew up with?
So I come from an interfaith family. My father is not Jewish, but again, my upbringing was a little different. Like I was not super connected to the broader Jewish community in our tribe growing up. But I've never like felt that it's negative to date non-Jews. Like I've dated both Jews and non-Jews throughout my life. Actually, right after October 7th happened, I was in a long-term relationship that ended with a non-Jewish person, and he didn't understand the Jewish identity at all, like, or what was happening and why it was affecting all of us, but me especially, so deeply. For like, something that's happening all the way across the world that he perceived we had no connection to because we lived all the way over here. So after that, I thought when I started dating again that I would lean more towards the Jewish community. And then I met Damien and just fell in love. That was that. I didn't even have a chance.
Look, the voice is just, again, I'm not ever gonna dress like him. But that the Tuesday that every time every time is the Tuesday. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, I gotta listen, I gotta watch because you just, I don't know why, be the voice and everything. And I'm like, all right, I guess so.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up in an interfaith family, and despite that, had always this big sense of pride in my Jewish identity that only ever strengthened as I grew up. And that's something that like I believe can happen whether or not both your parents are Jewish. And he is fully supportive of my Jewish identity. He's actually extremely knowledgeable about Jewish history on his own because he's a little bit of a history nerd. So that's awesome. And he's fully supportive of knowing that our children will be Jewish, and I want to raise them with a strong connection to our community as well.
And so I was gonna really kind of ask, like, what did you feel like the difference would be between your last non-Jewish relationship and this one? And it's clearly one kind of like this pre-existing knowledge, right?
Mm,
Into which obviously creates that understanding of like, oh, I get why you are connected to this country that's on the other side of the world and these people that are on the other side of the world. And
absolutely.
there's that level of acceptance. Um,
I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I think that's how interfaith families work best is just that mutual acceptance and understanding. And if that understanding isn't pre-existing, that effort to really learn about the other person's culture and community and to accept that in the way that they want to connect to it themselves.
So then, if you could maybe expand off that, because, hopeful, my hope is that there would be some people who are in interfaith relationships now, whether they're marriages or not, or people who feel like maybe, my own sister is getting married to a non-Jew.
Mm,
And, one of the things that I have really come to, my own journey around, this and all of it as well, because, the whole point of, gam v'gam is, two things can be true at the same time.
yep.
um, is that, it's all about, what the individual relationship is like, and so much of it is these clear communication lines that are open that says like, this is what, my home is going to look like.
Mhm.
There's these are the deal breakers, right? These are the non-negotiables, right? And these are the things I can, be a little bit more lenient on. Some people feel like having a Christmas tree is still too much. Some
Mm,
people are okay with the Christmas tree. Some people say like, we are going to be members of a synagogue. Others say that's, no, that's okay. Other, whatever it is. I mean, the reason why I felt so strongly about marrying somebody that was Jewish mostly was because I just didn't want to have fights about money. Like, I,
yeah.
for real, it's expensive to be Jewish,
Yeah.
and there's, summer camp, and so Jewish summer camp is like way more expensive than normal summer camp. And I just
Yep.
didn't want to have to, I didn't want to have to, even if someone was like, oh, I totally get it, we can raise our kids Jewish. Like, to me, if it's a choice between, going on a vacation to Maui and sending my kid to Jewish summer camp because it's more expensive, like, I'm going to choose the latter because it's that important. And somebody who's not Jewish might not understand that. Um, and so, but, at the same time, everyone has, also a lot of, I would say, geographic constraints,
Mhm.
especially, when you are in small Jewish communities like, here in Phoenix, in Portland, especially on the West Coast, outside of Los Angeles and stuff, it can be
Yeah.
really difficult actually. So people end up, falling in love with people that, maybe just aren't so happen to be a member of the tribe now.
Mm.
So for you, if you wanted to say something to those who are concerned about it, they just can't find somebody Jewish, in their city, or they're already in an interfaith relationship, what would you say to them as to how to navigate this and to make sure that they can know, right, that it's okay to be in this interfaith relationship, and also that you can have incredible amounts of Jewish pride?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is communicating what's important to you, right? Like, not only that, but knowing what's important to you. So, like,
Mm,
knowing how you want to show up in your Judaism. Like, I'm not a super religious person. I never have been, but we each connect to our culture and our practices in ways that feel right for us.
mm,
And I think that it's important to like fully know that and explore that in order to come to your partner and say, this is what I want my future to be like, this is what I want our family to be like,
mm,
in like our Jewish identities, whether they share that or not, so that they can best support you. Because if you're expecting blind understanding without communicating what you want and what you see for yourself, how can you expect support in that, if they don't know? So I think that that's the most important thing. And I'm still exploring, I'm still learning what level of practice I like to do. If I want to keep Shabbat every Friday, or if sometimes I want to go out with my friends because they only are free on Friday
No,
nights.
well, and here's the beautiful thing that I wish that more Jews would understand, which
Mm,
is that that your Jew there's a reason why they call it Jewish practice or
mm,
practicing Judaism. An Orthodox rabbi in my community explained this, and this is not the first time that I've heard someone explain it to me like this, which
yeah.
is that Judaism it's like going to the gym, right?
Yeah.
So when you go to the gym, right, you lift weights and you can lift a 10-pounder, right?
Mm,
And you lift a 10-pounder enough times, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I want to. This is too easy, right? So I'm going to go and lift a 20-pounder, and then you do
mm,
that, and then all of a sudden, you're at this 50-pounder, right? Because you realize how amazing it feels to go to the gym. You
yeah.
see the benefits that you have of going to the gym and of being healthier and of being doing this, and so you want to constantly challenge yourself. And Judaism is some of the same way. After October 7th, I wanted to think about I don't keep kosher, and
Yeah.
I don't keep the Sabbath or anything of the sort. But like, it was after I got back from a volunteer mission into Israel, I came back and I said, I want to wrap the fill in. I've
Mm,
never, I wrap the fill in, when I go to Israel, basically, or like, when it's, when some Chabadnik is around town and I
yeah.
just so happen to run in, he's like, have you wrapped the fill in yet? No. All right, I'll do it. Right.
Yeah.
So I came home and I went to my rabbi and I said, I want to wrap the filling. He goes, well, it just so happens that like this is my thing. I love giving out the filling. So I have, because the filling is very expensive. It's like
Yes.
$500. So he gave me to fill in. And so now I wrap pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And that's a part of it. And when I first started out, I made a video of me doing it for the very first time. And I was like
Mm,
reading off a paper and I was doing it incorrectly, but I wanted people to see that I was doing it wrong,
yeah.
that I was doing it and that I was
That
trying to
you're
be better.
yeah.
Exactly. And then 6 months later, I did another video of me doing it entirely on my own and like without any help or anything of the sort, because you just have to keep doing it.
Mhm.
And so, then, I got back from, I was just in Mexico City, and everywhere there is, it's just pork and cheese. It's pork and cheese.
Yeah.
And so for some reason, I got, and my wife doesn't, she doesn't eat pork. And she also doesn't eat shellfish. And so for me, I was like, you know what? Like, I don't actually, it's not like I eat pork chops or anything like that, but,
Yeah.
I'll eat the bacon, at
Yeah.
breakfast. But then I said to myself, when I go, like, I can just get chicken sausage. Like, I don't have to have the bacon.
Mm,
And it's just that little thing that in my head of like, what does it mean to live Jewishly, right? What
yeah.
does it mean to live even culturally Jewish? It means you don't eat bacon. Like, that's our culture,
Yeah,
right?
and that's different for everyone. Like,
Yeah.
everyone finds how their culture fits with them in their own unique way. Like, for me, there was a time where I tried to keep Shabbat every Friday, and I'm like, "This doesn't work for me," but if I can show up when I need to, that's what's
Right.
important, and if I can find ways to incorporate as much of my Jewish identity in my life that I can, in a way that brings that light and that joy, that's all that matters,
And so,
It's
what are you doing now? So, if you're like, just a curiosity, what like
yeah.
if you're okay with sharing, I'd love to hear. Maybe just one example of like what is the thing that you're doing now that you would consider to be, more of a Jewish practice that you
Mhm.
weren't doing prior, and
Yeah.
something that you're interested in exploring, now and also into the future, as you get married and have kids.
Yeah, so something like I now practice all of our holidays, which is something that I've gave myself a challenge when I first started like learning more about the ones that I didn't know, like the smaller ones of like
Mm,
fully celebrating one every single year. So like a new one that I like fully dove into in addition to all the other ones. So just kind of like add that onto my plate
cool.
and see what felt right. Like sometimes I can't. Like next week is Passover and I am at a convention for 12 hours every single day for the entirety of Passover. So I'm like, I will do the best that I can, but it will not be what I've done in the past. Like I'm in nursing school right now. So I sometimes am at the hospital from sunrise to sundown in clinicals where I can't celebrate Shabbat on Fridays, and that's okay. So when I do have a free Friday, like I'll light candles, but sometimes I have to study and I don't have time to sit down and, you know, do the whole family thing every single Friday night. And that's okay. But when I do have time, I make the space for it in a way that I feel fills my Jewish heart. But non traditionally, I think that one of the biggest things that I do is just check in with my Jewish community.
Mm,
Like I text my Jewish friends as regularly as I can. I think especially when times are a little harder for our community and things are going on in Israel that are a little bit more of a heavy weight for all of us, that's
mm,
when I make sure to reach out. And I think that that is how I show myself most Jewishly, is
Mm,
by really supporting our tribe and our community as much as I can when we need it, and making sure that like I do my part to show up and bring the light and spread the joy wherever I can, but also just grieve with everyone when we need to.
absolutely. And so where, have you ever been to Israel?
I have not. I
All
tried to go
right.
on birthright right before like COVID, and then
Ooh,
COVID happened, and then
that's
they
rough.
reopened things, and then I started nursing school, so it hasn't worked out. But I am trying to plan a trip right now. My old roommate, who I love and adore so much, she's like family to me. But a lot of her family is in Israel, and she lived there for a year
Mm,
before going to medical school. So I'm hoping when I'm at a nursing school and she's at a medical school, we can find a time for us and her entire family, who I'm really close with, to all go
mm.
together.
That's very cool. Well, I will also want to make sure that you know about a wonderful organization called Honeymoon Israel,
Oh no.
which is essentially like Birthright, but for couples.
Yeah.
And it basically is for like if you're two Jews who have like never been to Israel,
Hmm.
or if you are one um, person is Jewish and one person is not Jewish,
Yeah.
and you have to be in like a long-term relationship. So
Yeah.
it's like you have to be together for 5 years, you have to be engaged, you have to be married, and
Hmm.
so it's like very specific, like where it's like we're not just like taking a couple that have been together for the last 6 months,
Yeah.
um, and so it's specifically for couples such as
Hmm.
yourself in order
Yeah.
to give both you and your non-Jewish partner the ability to be with a community of others, because it's a whole bus of
Yeah.
like 20 40 people total, that everybody is experiencing the same thing. So just I would recommend also looking into that, especially since you've never
Yeah.
been. The last
Absolutely.
thing
Neither has my fiance. Like he's
with
never been either. So it
there you
would be
go.
fantastic. Yeah.
And so really the last question I want to ask is, what do you say that you've been trying to give back to your community as much as
Mhm.
possible, but also what can the community do for you and for interfaith couples to make them feel more welcomed into the
Yeah.
community?
I think I think especially like a dichotomy right now, especially in diasporous Jews, where there's a lot of like black and white thinking going
Yeah.
on. And I think that's natural in response to all the stress that we're enduring and the difficulties that we've had the last year and a half. But to really remember that like we're all Jews together, like bottom of the line, no matter what we believe politically, across the spectrum, like no matter what differences we have, at our core, we are all still Jews. And I think that that's like the biggest thing to remember. And I think that's important also for non-Jewish partners to keep in mind, is that that's something that will never change about us, is we are Jews. And it is, like it or not, like it is something that we have to be proud in. And it is sorry, my cat's all over my desk. Um, but like it or not, like we are Jews, and that's something that we will always find great joy and great light in, but also that comes with a lot of grief. And it's something that we have to endure together. And if we are not together to endure that, how
Hmm.
can we support each other? Like, how can we find that strength that we need to keep moving forward and that hope that we need? And so that's, I think, the biggest thing that I've been trying to cling to, is remembering like we are a Jewish community. It doesn't matter if these minute details I disagree with you on. Right now, more than ever, we need to be together and support each other.
Well, I think that's a beautiful thing to end on. Thank you so much, Corinne, for being here, for sharing your story. And I wish you well on your journey as you travel on the road to Zion.
Thank you so much.